All right, great. The recording is going.
Okay. Well, welcome. We're really excited to kind of do this follow up with Wade. Artist Wade Schaming was our artist in residence back in March a year ago. Can you believe it? It was a year ago, Wade. That was amazing, right?
Crazy.
Uh, right when the whole COVID thing. Wade is originally from New York City. Um, it was right when the whole COVID thing started to explode in New York. He was here with us for a 3-week residency, and we actually were. We were the last face-to-face studio talk in the GMB before we shut down. So you are you are doing a follow-up now. We haven't had another in face-to-face, person-to-person talk since that time. So it's kind of interesting. We'll have to see how you weathered once you went back to New York. Um, just some quick information. Wade was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He lives
Pittsburgh.
Is that correct, sir?
Pittsburgh.
Oh, Pittsburgh. I'm sorry. Oh, that's Philadelphia. Yeah, right. Okay. So he was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He has a master's in fine arts from the School of Visual Arts and a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Pittsburgh. So like I said, it was interesting. Wade rightfully ended his residency about a week early. Is that correct, Wade? Probably about a week, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then decided to go back home because really it was kind of uncharted territory at that point. Nobody knew, even with the flights and everything else, what was going on. So um, why don't we, we're going to get to your sculptural works and we're going to get to your drawings, which I'm really excited about. But why don't we begin kind of and catch up where we left off? And if you were really kind of forthright with a lot of great personal information in our last talk. So maybe you can just kind of get us up to speed about what happened when you returned to New York and your kind of travel since then.
Yeah. It was like for everyone is a pretty wild time. I was with you guys in Florida, and every day right before I left, it seemed like there was another crazy headline making day. And then we had our talk. I think it was a Thursday, and we had the open studios, and then I flew back the next day.
Right.
Friday the 13th, I believe.
Pretty
Yeah.
ominous time, right? Yeah.
Ominous, yeah. And then I was in New York that weekend. Everything shut down, closed, and then like so many others, I started to feel sick about a week later.
Wow.
So I think I kind of think I got infected with COVID after I returned that weekend, and then
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing for me in our conversation to hear you, because you're a very fit guy. You're very you have a very strict diet, and you work out all the time. So to hear someone like yourself and what you went through, it was kind of scary because you went through some time, didn't you?
Yeah, it was about 12 days of hell.
Wow.
And and like it was a really wild time to be sick because there were so many people sick and there was a lot of unknowns, which I think was
Right.
the scariest part of it, because like some days I'd feel really bad and just didn't know what you didn't know what to do. And I didn't know
Right.
I questioning whether or not I was sick enough to go to the hospital. Fortunately, I didn't have to. I did go to urgent care eventually, and there was nothing they could do.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
So
it's
fortunately, I
right. No, I was going to say, thank God it never progressed to that point, because you were saying how even the hospitals up in New York at that point, that's when New York was really getting hit hard, and the hospitals were all kind of filling up, and right.
They were just, they were telling you not to come to the hospital unless you absolutely had to. And
Wow.
that was what the urgent care told me to do. They said I went in, I had chest x-rays, the saturation test done, which was what like the teledoc doctor told me to do. And the PA at the urgent care told me, you know, go home, drink
Wow.
water like it's your job, don't see anybody. And then if you wake up and you're too exhausted to lift your head, or if you can't finish a sentence without taking a breath, call 911 and go straight to the hospital.
Wow.
That was it.
Wow, thank God you turned the corner. That's great news. I mean,
Yeah.
that had to be very scary because really at that point, nobody knew, even you know, fit people like yourself were having a really bad time of it, you know?
Yeah, it was very scary. It held off the cabin fever though, because it was like the second week of lockdown that I was so sick, and so like I couldn't do anything, so that kind of helped. Yeah.
So now, how long was it after New York that you realized, you know, I'm going to make some changes and I'm going to try to get in a more healthy environment, and you were able to go see some friends, I think, on the West Coast. Is that correct?
Yeah, I had a friend in San Diego who had a spare bedroom, and once it was April, once it became clear, once I was better, no longer contagious, and once it became clear that life was not going to resume, I left New York like so many did, and I came out here to California, where I am right now, and sort of hid out, quarantined here, and then started drawing, not making any sculpture because it was too hard, and also like where my studio is in New York, the building was closed. You weren't even allowed to go in, so I just brought some pens and paper with me and started drawing. I did about a drawing a day, and then
that's great. Yeah, that's you know, I know another artist friend who had gone through a very trying time, and she said the thing that got through her was she did a drawing a day too. It was like this, it was almost like this monk-like, kind of application of, you did it whether you felt great, whether you didn't feel, you know what I mean, whether you didn't feel good. And she said it really helped her through that tough time. So that's interesting.
Yeah. It also like it let me have purpose in that crazy time, like I was like, oh, I need to do that, I need to work, I need to make something today, and once I make something, then I can do something else. We can resume binge watching Ozark or whatever, whatever we were watching at the time.
Right. So now I think you said you originally went over to San Francisco and then you wound up in LA, is that correct? Or
San Diego,
and
then
that's right.
LA, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's where you are now, correct?
Yeah, so I know. Well, I came back to New York in July, when things kind of reopened, the studio reopened, and then I was there until I came out here right after my birthday in January. Sort of have a similar experience, basically to escape winter.
So we'll be starting to discuss your work now, but has this kind of, we could revisit it at the end, but has this kind of changed your way of thinking about your working method at all, having gone through this? And, you're very meticulous and kind of very ordered in your sensibility about how you kind of, your studio practice. So I was wondering if anything changed or any revelations came to light during this time. Sometimes good things can happen for us as artists during these trying times, and we walk away with a little unexpected gem.
Yeah, I wouldn't say so much with the sculpture. Like once I was able to get back into the studio in New York, my process it's sort of the same, finding, collecting, and building assemblages. But the drawing, because it's so much more mobile, and I can draw on, like the paper I have with me fits in a book bag for my carry-on.
Right, right.
And so the drawing, I guess, the drawing is what has sort of changed in the sense that I've been doing more of it.
Right,
I
right.
wouldn't say the process has really changed, although it's allowed me to, the quarantine series I did was a break from what I was doing prior, which is how I was drawing when I was in Maitland.
Okay.
And then after the quarantine series finished, which I think I finished here in LA, and I went back to New York, I started another series titled California, even though I was in New York doing it, because it was sort of like that, romanticized California dreaming
Right.
feeling that I was thinking, which is sort of like how I still feel about LA and California, is this romantic, like the motif of like the American West and the frontier and
Right, right.
the possibility, I guess.
Sure. Well, I have to tell
The
you how
promise, yeah.
that all of us on staff here that follow you on Instagram, we're living vicariously through your through your West Coast experience. We were envious. Every day we'd get up and we'd go, "Oh my God, did you see Wade? Wade's post?" And it was just like we were there with you, running out of the
Right.
ocean, and it was fun. It was really great.
Once the beaches were reopened and the trails were reopened, you had to take advantage of it.
Sure.
Like the return to nature. And it's California's fault that it's so beautiful.
Right, right, right. Well, listen, Wade, why don't we'll go quickly then, because we had a great time talking about your sculptural works the last time you were here. So, but I do want to get to your drawings. So let's go quickly and refresh everybody's, maybe some people that are tuning in weren't, didn't get a chance to come to that first talk. And so, Danielle, if we could put up that first image. So we talked about how your art making practice has this rich history all the way back to Duchamp and his process of ready-mades and how he would assemble these found objects into these sculptures, and how they were like a critique on beauty itself and what was beautiful and what object could be considered beautiful. I think we have another one, Danielle. So this was another one called Homage to Manet by Vanista from 1961. So it's this kind of rich history that you belong to. I think we talked about how a lot of the conceptual art and the lineage of this can get kind of cold and removed. But the thing I liked about your work was it had this really beautiful, kind of intimate, playful quality. Right. And I think this is one of the pieces that you did here. Is that correct, Wade?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So we'll discuss. I think there's three here that we're going to discuss, but there's this real playfulness with your sculptural works. And for me, the thing that was really amazing about them, if you spend time with them, each one has kind of a constructed identity. They're very different than, it's not like you have 30 minimalist sculptures and they all kind of look like each other. They're drastically different one from another. So why don't you just give us a little background on your studio practice with these sculptural works, and then we'll move on to your drawings.
Yeah. So this is one of the pieces I made at the art center, and all the pieces, all the parts I found there. So I found throughout the grounds, the blue metal thing was, tucked away and outside and sort of like a refuse type area. And then I know that like spongy, like teal aqua thing I found like outside someone's studio. And the rest I kind of don't remember where I got it all, but I think what might be hard to for people who aren't seeing it in person, it maybe doesn't look like it's just balanced and it's all stacked things and nothing is
Right.
fastened. And I think that really provides it the energy when you're seeing it in person, that
Yeah,
it sort of
absolutely.
reinforces the like personality that each piece has.
Right.
And you know, the part about like the referencing Duchamp and all the other found work artists, found object artists is, you know, there is, I think of it as there's so much power in these objects that, you know, don't serve their purpose anymore. They're sort of, you know, they had a life and now they no longer have a life because
Wow.
they're
Right.
older or they're discarded or they're broken. Like that like piece on top, I want to say it was like a wooden thing that broke off one of the chairs that maybe I used in another
Right.
piece. But like here, it you know, it's sort of like the crown of this, you know, tower, which is I still call them towers, which I wonder like if I really need to do that anymore, which I think it like goes back like 10 years of me thinking them as buildings, but now I don't really think of them as buildings so much anymore. But yeah.
Can we go on to the second image, Danielle, please? Right, like so this will give the viewer an idea of what I'm talking about. Like, and that's that. You know, what you brought up is a really key element in your work. That not only are they not fastened and not constructed as a final permanent image, they don't exist outside of photographs after they're completed. Right? They
Right.
like this isn't sitting in your studio somewhere. This was all taken back down after it was documented. Is that correct?
Yeah. And also this was like the blue metal thing is repeated between the two, but they were
Oh,
two
right.
different
Okay, I didn't even notice that. Right.
yeah, they were two different pieces, but it was exciting for me to find two similar objects and to use them in different ways. I think there was actually a third one, but I think I ran out of time to use it, like a third blue one
Oh, okay.
there.
Interesting. Right.
Yeah.
So is there something about it? It kind of, you know, I had talked to you like about that. I saw this poetic notion in your work, and do you think that investing a new life or giving a second life to some of these elements is part of that sensibility of yours, or?
I kind of think of it as a giving it, allowing it to be whatever it wants to be, you know, like the piece as a whole, but also the objects, which usually I tend to use stuff that is somewhat worn, not necessarily brand new
Right.
domestic things. And sort of thinking, I guess my thinking is like, oh, you know, these objects all together are so much better than whatever they were before.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I don't,
It's funny.
and a lot,
I remember taking you in the back of the foundry area here, and you looking over at that blue object, and here it is, like it was covered with debris and rusted over, and you're like, that I want that, you know. So I was like, okay, let's just go to it. You know, here we go. And so to see it, it really does. It has repurposed itself, and or has been given this freedom, like you said, to be itself in your work, which is interesting.
and a lot of times like I don't really know like what the stuff is that I'm using. Like I have no idea what these blue metal things are for. I just look at them as like, oh, it can, you know, it can stand up on its own, and I can put it on top of this, you know, plastic Tupperware thing, and it fits perfectly, and the two stacked on together is holding, you know, for now. And then, you know, the other stuff I got from other people, or it was like I don't even remember what the white thing was, but I want to say it was metal, or it might be plastic, and it fit perfectly.
Danielle, can we go into the third image, please?
A lot of it is like kind of like, you know, working with a puzzle, you know,
Right.
the puzzle pieces fit the way they're meant to, even though it's like a pre-cut thing. That's sort of like the way I'm thinking with these, even though I'm the one that's determining what fits.
Right.
It's
Right.
sort of like once things stack and stay, and it just, you know, I just think, oh yeah, that's it. That, you know, it's done.
But it's funny, I joke with a fellow, one of my directors about the word painterly, but some of the use of like color becomes important in some of the works, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
the previous one, you had these red, you know, these, and I know it's not anything like you haven't changed any of the you know, the basic physical attributes of any of these pieces. But like this one, I love when I went into the studio and saw this, it felt like I was in this old world, like alchemy, you know, like some back in the day in the Middle Ages, somebody was trying to combine these elements into something else. And that's really what was going on. So I was kind of like intrigued by it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think especially like the basic symbolism, and then the rust and this piece I loved when I went in and found it in the studio. I thought it was great. I thought it was really great.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's very
Yeah.
inviting, but then it's kind of ominous as well. Like there's some kind of metaphysical thing going on, which is kind of fun, you know.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that triangle is very, the triangle and the square is very symbolic of, you know, many organizations and, you know, representative of, you know,
Right,
things. I can see that. Yeah. But like, it's funny because like I don't think of that when I'm doing it.
right. No, it's
Sort of.
exactly right. Well, that's a beautiful thing
Yeah.
for me. Like when, you know, once you kind of let it go, the beautiful thing is that the narrative, whatever kind of basic narrative you're forming in these works, I bring my own baggage to it, my own thing to it, and then I can inhabit it, and it starts talking to me on a different level than you intended, which is great, you know. All of them function like that. They're very open-ended, and they don't kind of seal off a certain dialogue. They just kind of spark a dialogue, you know, which is nice, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
okay, well, listen, why don't we, is there anything else that you'd like to kind of, one thing I was saying is because these, one thing I was thinking is because these only exist as documents now, as documentation, are you thinking of putting a book together that would kind of like where you could, because when you go to your website, and I encourage people to do that, when you see them one after another and how they change, for me, they change radically in their identity and kind of the objects involved. It's interesting when you go through 20 or 30 of them, you get this feeling like this uh, kind of broader conversation taking place that you really want to find out what's going on. You want to find out what that conversation is, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely, I think definitely them together in sort of a book form, printed, makes sense because a lot of, especially the bigger work and the work I make at residencies, it's impossible to keep
Right.
them. But also at the same time, there is that I think there's power in them not continuing.
Right.
I think, you know, and unfortunately, it's only the people who are at the place that get to see it in person. But
Right.
that's just the
And you know,
ephemeral.
it is true, especially in today's art world. Everything is, you know, the whole commodification of everything is, you know, you go to these art fairs and everything is screaming at you, and there's kind of a real innocence with your work that it exists. You know, it's these objects are brought together, they exist for a moment, and then they kind of exist in memory from that point on. You know, something kind of very innocent and admirable about that, I think, you know.
Yeah, I definitely I take a lot of inspiration from Christo and Jean-Claude and Andy Goldsworthy, and even, you know, the performance artists. This sort
Right.
of, you know, this is for the now, it's for the present moment, and then you know, we carry on.
Right. Well, listen, why don't we move on to your drawings?
Okay.
We have the next image, please.
Mhm.
So now, I encourage you, anybody, if you haven't, if you don't follow Wade on Instagram, there's some great images that videos that he has put up of his process, and it looks very. It's kind of beautifully repetitious. These are small, right? These are on 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Or
These might
about
be
10?
9 by 12, but it's about,
Okay.
yeah, they're
Same, like
small.
it's same standard office size almost, right?
So this is old construction paper from when I was a kid that I found in my
Oh,
parents'
interesting.
house.
Now
So
this,
that's why it's like faded on the edges, because it's like almost, it's like 35 years old.
that's great.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. So how did you come across? Because that, you were very kind of forthright with some personal information about your childhood and wrestling against some things that were going on in your household at that time. And how did you come across this old paper? That's kind of really
Well, I mentioned, my mother was a hoarder, so she
right.
kept everything, anything, and even stuff that was mine and my brother's,
Wow.
like toys and everything. So I finding and collecting all the objects I use for the sculptures has sort of given me also the desire to do the same with paper.
Interesting.
Even though the majority of the paper I use I buy.
Right.
But
Okay.
I found these two books of construction paper that I started working with about. I did a series about 4 years ago, I think, called I named them Construct after construction paper, and
Right.
went through the book, and then I was out, so that was done, and then I found this book, I guess, after then, so I'm returning to it now. And I've started recording some of the drawing process, because a lot of people don't realize that it's hand drawn.
Right.
They think it's a computer generated design. So I've, Instagram and all of the social media
Oh, no,
platforms,
it was
very video, there's a lot of video components to it. So I'm just, relenting to another way of
Hey, you know what? It was
showing.
helpful to see. It was and not only that, when you in the video you get to see the scale of the work, which is very intimate. So, you get to see the size of your hand in relation to the work, and
I didn't even think of that. I'm like the first time I did it, I was holding my phone while I was filling it in, just to put it on like one of the Instagram stories, because people, when I would tell people, oh, it's hand, that I made this, I do it by hand, they're like, oh, I didn't know.
right.
And then someone else suggested, oh, well, you need to do TikTok videos, or just make it into a video. So now it's, in a couple weeks time, now I'm like putting up a tripod and recording and then editing the image, although it's still very, very basic.
Right. Well, it was enjoyable. In getting ready for our talk, I just went back to refresh myself, and looking at those videos was, it really is this kind of monastic, deliberate, repetitive, you know what I mean? It's kind of interesting, very foreign from how I work and a lot of artists I know work. So it was, yeah. So, it's funny. Can we go to the third image, the next one, not the next one, Danielle, the next one. Right. So one of my favorite artists is Agnes Martin, and she's a minimalist painter. I'm sure you're aware of her, but she's a minimalist painter, and she found out that removal of emotion and that kind of the grid pattern, very similar to what you're working with, was a very spiritual kind of practice for her. These are all small. These are pretty much the same size as the ones that you're working on. So when I went and looked, I remember seeing a show of her drawings, and they appear very simple at once if you encounter one at a time. But like your drawings, when you see this wide range of them, and they're all this really beautifully hand drawn grid patterns. For her, they were almost like this spiritual exercise, So I was kind of, when I was thinking about your drawings, I was like, oh my God, it reminded me of this Agnes Martin show that I saw in New York. And I think there's one more, Danielle, that we can show of her work. Right. So you can see it's this basic kind of trying to achieve balance, and a lot of these look like they were printed, like you said, but they were all hand drawn. And it's funny, she was a minimalist. She considers herself an abstract expressionist, but it's interesting because, like, there's one quote she has that I wanted to read you and see what you thought of it. She said, when I made my first grid, I happened to be thinking of the innocence of trees. Then the grid came to mind, and I thought it represented innocence. And I still do now. So when I painted it and in my drawings, I thought, okay, this is my vision. This is what I'll continue with. So it's kind of interesting, right? Like, because in going back to the conversation about some of your sculptures, there is this kind of innocence about the way they're here. It's temporary, and then they've moved on,
It's funny she mentions trees, because trees are all constantly evolving, and Mondrian started with the tree,
Right.
Trees were what became the squares, and then that's interesting because the sculptures are kind of like trees more than buildings, although
right
when I was a kid, buildings were built and they lasted forever, and now we know that they don't. They're either destroyed intentionally or they're torn down intentionally.
Right.
Like what they're, JP Morgan is doing in New York. They just tore down a skyscraper to build a new one.
Right.
And yeah, that's interesting.
Can we go back to Wade's drawing one or two back, Danielle? Like this one. So it's really great when you sit with them for a minute, because they have this kind of like it's like this equilibrium going on, right? And it's kind of hanging. It seems like it's hanging by a thread, but it really is. Actually, when you look at it, it's really stable. It's pretty stable. And it's funny, it reminded me of how all your objects and your sculptures are just like nothing is adhered together, right? It's like this, you're actually witnessing this moment of balance. Do you think that ties over into your drawings, or is that just me kind of reading into that? Or
yeah, yes and no. Like I have trouble vocalizing or even like writing the connection between the two, even though I know they are connected. And what I think the connection is when I'm drawing the outlines, I'm deciding where the line is placed, and that's sort of how I think when I'm stacking objects. Like this goes with this, and this I want the triangle with the square, and so I think that's where it is. I don't think of them, but yeah. So I think the work I was doing last year during quarantine, I was trying to think of them as like, oh, these are towers, or these are like a 2D version of towers. But even then, it's sort of, it's just different,
Right.
So here, this set of construct series, I'm not going to the edge. The ones I did 4 years ago, I drew until it got to the edge and filled the whole page, sort of thinking it as wallpaper. But these, I'm sort of going back to what I've been doing the past couple of years, is not going to the end of the paper and allowing it to be a shape, whatever that shape is.
Can we go back?
So sort of like an object,
Right. I have this other quote. I went through a bunch of Agnes Martin quotes just for my own in thinking about this, but I have this other quote that she said, and I thought of you, and it says, I don't think the way to succeed is by doing something aggressive. Aggression is for the weak-minded. Now, a lot of artists tend to think that the aggressive way is the way, it's the, I can name a whole bunch of blue chip artists that tend to think that way. But you seem to like the fact that your work is temporary, the fact that it only exists in this thing. There's this kind of grace about it where it's very content to be, you know, not aggressive. Does that make sense to you? Like, you know, it's
Yeah,
knowing that its strength is not in that aggression. So it's just it's embodying what its strength is, you know.
yeah, I do think there is a delicacy in both mediums that I choose. You know, I think painting is a little bit more aggressive, even though like sculpture seems to have sort of like a aggression to it because it's 3D. I think because I make ephemeral work, it's
Right,
not
right,
really aggressive. Yeah,
right,
and I don't, you know, I don't use the wall, I don't use the ceiling. I'm just building up from the ground.
right.
Again, going back to the trees, you know.
Yeah, and
But,
it's funny you talk about it. Like even when you go in, like when I went into your studio to sadly dismantle some of these, or the other one that was, um, they don't confront you in a hostile way at all. They're very the dialogue that's going on is very introspective with them. You know, it's kind of like
mm,
existing in its own space, which is kind of really nice. You know, didn't really
mm,
care if I was in the room with it at all. It was just kind of hovering there, and so. And that kind of fragility and that kind of, you know, I would innocence, if you want to call it that, that's hard to come by. That's hard to, you know, you can't manufacture that. You have to, you know, you have to exist
uh,
in that space, and
I
that's
think it's also two things. Like I try to make the sculptures as tall as me. Like I'm a tall person. I'm like 6'4", and that goes back to like my sculpture professor in undergrad saying, "Oh, you're a big person. You should make big work." And so for like, you know, that's kind of stuck with me. Oh, they need to be as tall as me. And then I think not fastening everything, keeping it together with balance and gravity, you know, you feel that vibration when you're in their presence,
right.
and they
Absolutely,
can
yeah.
fall over, and a lot of times they do fall over. um you know, when I'm in the studio by myself, and it's not even, you know, me doing it, they don't hold,
Right.
because they're not meant to. And yeah, that's why I think that's why, you know, photographing them is so important.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Well, listen, I hope that the book thing manifests itself. Um, you know, I think everybody could benefit from seeing them all in that form. So I'm just throwing that out there again. Listen, we're gonna open up to just 2 or 3 questions real quick, and then we'll
Mhm.
wrap it up. Danielle, do you have anything that we could ask Wade before he ends his
Um,
conversation?
I don't have any questions right now, but if any of our guests do, they can feel free to type it into the Q&A or the chat or raise their hand and I can unmute you. So let's see.
Well, Wade, while we're waiting on the questions, thank you so much for. It's kind of nice. It's almost like we've come full circle, and you've put a punctuation on the whole lockdown. And you know, we've all here at A&H, we've gone through all kinds of crazy experiences over the last year. So I'm feeling kind of hopeful in this conversation with you that things are returning to normal, and we all wish you the best. And we know that hopefully we can have you here again as an artist in residence. We'd all really enjoy that.
Yeah, no, I would love the opportunity to come back. And I was, you know, I was thinking of this yesterday, how a year ago this week was when I arrived, and what a different world
Right, right.
I was arriving to. Even though I think I want to say like the day I landed, like March 1st was like the first case in New York, or there was something that happened.
Right, right.
So that's sort of that. It was a very interesting time to be down there, those first 2 weeks of March. But it was very, you know, I'm very grateful for the experience. I was able to do a lot of work, even in a short amount of time. And I think part of that is the legacy of the artists who created the center, and the fact that it's still going. It's still,
Right,
it's
right.
still museums, it's still art residencies, and local artists work there. I think that, communal work ethic really allows for great work to be made.
Well, that's what we feel. So we appreciate that. That's what we're kind of, all of us here are very aware that that's something worth fighting for. So that's why we choose to do it,
Mhm.
So Danielle, is there anybody that anything for Wade, or can we sign off, or?
No, I didn't see any questions come through, but I have one. So you kind
Oh,
of
okay.
mentioned that you outline your works on paper before you get started. So do you kind of have like the full idea in your head, or do you just create it as you go for the works on paper?
Oh, interesting. So it's more like, I need to like demonstrate it, but I start with like a row, and so sometimes in the center, or a little off center, and just lines, and sort of line it out, and then turn the page, and then create sort of each rectangle, and then build it out from wherever I started. So that's where, that's how the shape forms, and then I fill in after. So the filling in is what takes the most amount of time, that people seem to find meditative or spiritual, but I actually find it a little frustrating. It's not my favorite part of
That's
it.
great.
I like the outlining of sort of, so like this piece, like the rectangle, the part that's not filled in, the orange, like building those out is what's pleasurable or exciting in the process. Yeah.
That's great. That is great. Okay, Danielle, are we good? Okay, well, listen, Wade, thank you so much. We are, and listen, if anybody's out there, and we're happy that we're able to have these free talks, online talks, and conversations with our affiliated artists. And if anybody would like to support the operating cost of A&H, to help support the operating cost, you can just text AHMM to 71777. And your donation will be matched by 15 to 30% through April 30th. So thank you for tuning in. And Wade, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.